In the aftermath of Bangladesh's July revolution, a dangerous constitutional crisis is emerging that threatens to derail the nation's path to democratic renewal. Firstly, the interim government led by Muhammad Yunus finds itself caught between competing visions of electoral democracy, with fundamentalist and student parties demanding radical changes and mainstream political parties insisting on constitutional compliance. Also, the student parties want their July charter to be included in Bangladesh's constitution by referendum before the country heads for elections. So in this edition of From the News Desk, we will tell you what are these demands by different political parties before the elections in Bangladesh, and also we will answer the most critical question: can Bangladesh conduct elections at all, or this current crisis will continue forever? Well, the central dispute revolves around the method of conducting upcoming national elections, reportedly scheduled before Ramadan in February 2026. Jamaat-e-Islami, Islami Andolan Bangladesh and other fundamentalist parties are demanding that parliamentary election be held under a system of proportional representation. This system would allocate parliamentary seats based on the percentage of votes each party receives, potentially giving smaller parties greater representation. Well, standing firmly against this proposal is Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or the BNP, one of the country's major political forces, which insist that elections must be conducted strictly according to the constitution. In fact, BNP's position is supported by parties like Jatiya Party and other mainstream political parties. This divide has created a fundamental disagreement that goes to the heart of Bangladesh's democratic future. The BNP's opposition to proportional representation is a strategically motivated move. As the largest organized political force in the country, following the Awami League's ban, the BNP stands to benefit significantly from the current first-past-the-post system. Under the existing electoral framework, the BNP could potentially secure a parliamentary majority, whereas proportional representation would likely deny them any advantage. Now, the constitutional framework provides little room for maneuver on electoral methods. Article 65 subsection 2 of Bangladesh's constitution categorically states that parliament shall consist of 300 members to be elected in accordance with law from single constituency by direct elections. Direct elections is the most important part of this law. This unambiguous provision leaves no constitutional pathway for implementing proportional representation without formal amendments. And the interim government, having taken oath under Article 148, is legally bound by these very provisions. In fact, Chief Election Commissioner of Bangladesh has already ruled out the possibility of introducing proportional representation without necessary legal reforms, emphasizing that the current electoral law do not permit such system. This constitutional reality transforms the debate over electoral systems into what many observers view as a delaying tactic. The interim arrangement cannot legally implement proportional representation, making the demand of fundamentalist parties constitutionally impossible to fulfill under the current law. Perhaps the most troubling is the demand by fundamentalist parties and students groups for a referendum to incorporate their July Charter into the constitution before the country heads for elections. The July Charter was basically created after the July 2024 mass uprising. It emerged from consensus talks between 30 political parties and the interim body led by Muhammad Yunus, aiming to guide constitutional, electoral and administrative reforms for country's future. Well, in short, Bangladesh's constitution contains no provision for referendums, as this mechanism was removed in the 15th Amendment. The removal of referendum provisions was based on sound legal reasoning as per Bangladeshi experts. Previous referendums conducted by military rulers like Zia-ur-Rahman in 1977 and Irshad in 1985 were later struck down by the Supreme Court of Bangladesh because it was considered a threat to the constitutional values. Now, the constitutional impossibility of conducting a referendum makes this demand immediately meaningless. Yet, its persistence suggests that proponents either misunderstand constitutional law or are using it as a political tool to delay elections further and maintain the current interim arrangement. Now, most revealing is the language now emerging from the July movement leaders talking of a referendum rather than democratic transition. The demand for what amounts to indemnity through constitutional incorporation of July Charter reflects growing anxiety among student leaders and fundamentalist allies who openly admitted to killing police officers and destroying multiple state installations during that very movement. Their current isolation from public opinion has created fears about potential legal consequences, driving their desperate push for constitutional protection. In fact, this fear explains the referendum demand as a last weapon to legitimize their actions and security legal immunity. However, Bangladesh's constitution provides no mechanism for such indemnity, and previous attempts at constitutional immunity have been struck down by the Bangladeshi judiciary. As politics escalates in the times of crisis, Bangladesh's leaders must choose between constitutional democracy and continued extra-legal governance, perhaps which are paving the way for further complications of Bangladesh's democracy. The growing talk of safe exit among July movement leaders suggests that they are somewhat on the similar path as past Bangladeshi leaders. Now the question remains whether they will accept this reality before further damaging Bangladesh's democratic prospects. Well, in the end, the winds of power intoxication that carried student leaders to influence are giving way to the solid grounds of constitutional crisis yet again. How they navigate this transition will not only determine their own political survival, but most crucially, future of Bangladesh's democracy itself.